So, why mustard? Dive right into that. So, in Matthew 13, verse 31, Jesus talks about these teeny tiny little things. The first one he says is, he told them another parable. This is verse 31. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that birds come and perch in its branches. Now, interestingly enough, like, there are actually smaller seeds than a mustard seed, but I doubt like Jesus wanted to like get into that debate. It was the smallest of their seeds. Like, for that part of the world, it would have been the smallest seed that they would know of at the time. Um, so it's interesting. Something teeny little tiny grows up into be this big, huge bush that birds can hang out in. Verse 33 says, he told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour and worked it all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. Let me start over on that verse. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So what was fulfilled through the prophet. Now, if you don't know what yeast looks like, here's a packet of yeast. And it does really kind of work through dough and makes it kind of yummy, I think. Like, if you ever see like dough rise, that's usually because of the yeast. And that kind of dry crackery bread that we use at communion, that's considered bread without yeast. And so that's what happens when you don't use yeast. So anyway, so these teeny tiny little things, mustard seeds, yeast, can make a big, huge difference. Now, are you guys familiar with the concept of guerrilla warfare? Has anybody heard that maybe in social studies class? Okay, it's not like this guerrilla warfare. Okay, it's not that. It's actually spelled different. Jasmine or Nathaniel, have you heard of it before? Okay, so that's okay. So guerrilla warfare is actually something that was used going back to the Revolutionary War. I don't know how much you guys have gotten into history. If you're in 8th grade, you should have gotten into the Revolutionary War. But maybe they didn't talk about guerrilla warfare. So the idea there was America knew like they had no chance at all going toe to toe, face to face with the Britain army because they were outnumbered, they were outgunned, they just had no chance. And so what they would do was say, hey, if 5 guys see like 20 British soldiers, like, hey, we can't take them, 5 on 20, but if we pick off a couple at a time and then charge them or surprise them or whatever, or set a trap, then we might actually have a chance against this horrifically big army, making it one dent at a time. And so that was kind of the idea of guerrilla warfare. And so that's what we did to kind of win the Revolutionary War. Now, the problem was we kind of had that done back to us in Vietnam, where Vietnam knew like they had no chance against America, and so they kind of did the same thing. They set traps. They had a crazy tunnel system that we had no idea what was up with that. They use farm tools as weapons, which it's like, yeah, is a gun better than a farm tool? Yeah, but if you sneak up on somebody, it's still effective. And so all these things, like I said, you don't think it would make a difference, but over time, these teeny tiny little methods, these teeny tiny little things make a difference in the kingdom of God. And anytime you hear or see about the kingdom of God mentioned in the Bible, it's not about like a real kingdom on this earth. And that was always just something that the disciples kind of missed. that just was something that just went over their head. Whenever they heard kingdom, they're like, ooh, we get to rule and we're going to be powerful. And Jesus is like, no, you're missing out. Like, when I talk about this idea, I'm not talking about kingdom on this world. I'm talking about the kingdom of heaven being with God. And the kingdom of heaven is also about the idea of anywhere where God is ruling, anywhere where God is reigning. And what he really was talking about was hearts, human hearts. That's what he wanted to talk about when the kingdom of God was on the move. This was a movement, okay? And so how does that movement get going? It's with this, not guerrilla warfare, but really it's kind of this guerrilla love. And so it's not the boom, shock, and awe. There was a church years ago, before Kanye West was really a Christian, there was a church who thought, hey, we know how to get people to come to our church. We'll host a Kanye West concert at our church, and that'll make everybody think we're cool. And they paid a lot of money to Kanye West to do this concert, and it didn't really nice. Thank you, Jasmine. I was talking about guerrilla love, and you go over to the word love on your wall. That's all right. It was a nice touch. I liked it. But anyway, so yeah, this church spent tons of money, like I think $250,000 on a Kanye West concert, and it just really didn't make that much of a difference. And it's like, oh man, that's a lot of money to spend without making much of a difference. And so a lot of times, like I said, God is able to use ordinary, basic things to make a big difference. Now, when what movie is it from where there's a princess who's with a boy and somebody threw an accusation at the princess and she said, I'm completely ordinary, and the guy says, that's right, she is. Does anybody know what? Yeah. And yeah. Now, I did find it interesting. I was looking this up earlier, and there's an interesting like tie together there because in Frozen 1, it's I think it was Hans, when Anna's just like, I'm completely ordinary, and he's like, that's right, she is, and he's like, in the most perfect way or something like that. Now, when Kristoff proposes in Frozen 2, have you guys seen Frozen 2? I don't want to spoil too much for you. Yeah, I didn't say what she says, but anyway. So I'm switching back to Frozen 2, and so did he? Oh, okay. But anyway, this was in Frozen 2. He says, extraordinary, Anna, you're one of the most extraordinary women I've ever met. And so I'm like, oh, hey, she's not ordinary, she's extraordinary. Isn't that nice? So anyway, so teeny tiny little things. And so what does that translate to for middle school students who are kind of quarantined and locked in their homes for the most part? What kind of things can we do to show love to people? I think, stay away from people. That can be helpful. Yeah, yeah. I think one of the other things, maybe sending a text to people that you miss, sending a note, especially for maybe older relatives, sending them a note really means a lot to them, that you took time to write it out, figure out how to fill out an envelope, postage, all that stuff, like spending almost 50 cents to send it in the mail. That stuff means a lot. McKenna's gotten a little like pen pal. I mean, it's a girl that she's known for a long time. Her name is Lydia, and she was in her class. And so they've just been exchanging letters, just to kind of keep in touch. And Jody was like, man, we're probably going to keep this as like mementos of, man, here's what life was like in 2020. It was weird. We had to kind of take a step back in time and do old school stuff. So text, writing a note, checking in on, like I said, aunts, uncles, grandparents, just seeing how people are doing, seeing how their physical and mental health is. I mean, it's tough. And little gestures, little, hey, how you doing? What's been going on? Anything, we can do for you or whatever. Those teeny tiny little things, believe it or not, can actually make a difference over time. And it shows love to people in a huge way, even though what you're doing really is just a teeny tiny little effort. And I mean, that's one of the ways I've tried to show that I care. I mean, one of my mottos as a student minister is people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And so I've seen that over and over again. Teenagers do not care how smart I am. They just don't. But when they see like how much I care and how much I'm for them, then they're kind of like, oh, wait a minute, let me listen to this guy because he might actually have some cool things to say. Now, it's funny, in chapter 10 of Matthew, Jesus talks about giving a cold cup of water in my name. And I mean, we might look at that and be like, well, yeah, cold cup of water, what's the big deal? Like if you're in the Middle East in the first century, you don't really have access to much cold water. The water you would pump would be like room temperature or warm because it's just so hot over there. And so for them to get cold water, a lot of times they'd take a jug and store it underground, and then that way it might get cold. They didn't have fridges or anything like we do. And so to offer somebody a cup of cold water was kind of a big deal. And so little things like that, little efforts like that can make a big deal. In John chapter 4, Jesus talked with a woman at the well. What did they do? They just sat there and talked and had water. It's just an ordinary thing. John chapter 3, Nicodemus. Jesus talks with Nicodemus and they have this conversation at night. Jesus is willing to give this guy the time of day and to give him attention. Sometimes that's all people need. Just putting in an effort to talk. Hey, how you doing? How's things? That can actually make a difference. And so there's a girl who played volleyball in college, and she was a Christian, and she went to the University of Illinois, Big Ten school. It's kind of pretty big deal. And she was kind of told, like, hey, just so you know, like, these girls are really heavy into partying, and we're not sure. I mean, you're a Christian. I'm not sure how well you'll fit in on this. And she was kind of thinking, well, I think I'll be okay. I'm not going to go and be a part of that scene, so it'll be all right. And so she kind of decided to go in like as a missionary almost and say, hey, I'm going to play volleyball and I'm going to love my teammates like I think Jesus would. And so she did. And now the teammates, like, everybody got a turn to put in like their CD as was like their pregame warm up or something like that, so everybody could play different music. And so she would say, hey, let's listen to this, and it was Christian music, and some of the girls would be listening to it and they're like, wait, was that song about Jesus? That was actually kind of a catchy song. And she's like, yeah, that's my CD. And they're like, huh, okay. And then like one girl was having a major problem with her and her boyfriend, and this girl was like, oh, hey, why don't you tell me about that, what's going on? And so they would sit and talk about it, and this girl was like, hey, like, what if we prayed about this? And she's like, okay. And then like other girls kind of caught on to what was going on, and then other girls were wanting to talk to her about what's going on in their life, and other girls were wanting to come in and pray with her and everything. And it's just like all of a sudden, like, this team really started to change, and actually they went from being a pretty terrible volleyball team to being a pretty good volleyball team. And they all kind of started turning their life, turning their heart towards Jesus. And it's kind of like, man, that's kind of crazy. All she did was say, hey, I'm going to play volleyball with these girls, and I'm going to be the best teammate I can be, and I'm just going to love them like I think Jesus would. And it made a huge difference that not all these girls, but a lot of these girls ended up being impacted and maybe being part of the kingdom of God, because of this one girl just doing teeny tiny things. And so after a couple years, this girl, they said, "Hey, what are you gonna do? Like, what's next for you?" She's like, "Well, I think I'm gonna try to transfer to Louisville and play volleyball there." And they're like, "What? Like, why would you do that? You got such a great thing here." And she's like, "I've heard they got a really messed up volleyball team." And it's like, man, like, this girl knows her mission. She knows her calling, and that's to just go and reach out to the girls that God has kind of put in front of her in terms of volleyball, and to build relationships with them and love them like Jesus would. And that can make a big, big difference. Let me close with this story, and we'll be done. There was actually 2 movies on this topic like last year, which is interesting because I don't think there's been any movies before on this issue. But it's called The Battle at Dunkirk, or The Rescue, or The Miracle at Dunkirk. I forget what the 2 movies were called. Jody and I watched one, and it was pretty intense. So what The Battle or Miracle at Dunkirk is when World War II was happening. I don't know how much you guys know about World War II, but Germany kind of just started taking over Europe, and so they took like Poland. I think they maybe took Hungary and Austria, and then everybody was kind of like, well, they'll never take France. Like, we know that France will hold up and they won't go any further. And then it's like in a month, it's like, boom, France is gone. Germany took over France, and they're kind of like, whoa, that's crazy. Did not see that coming. But Germany had this great military power, and they were just running everybody over with it. And Great Britain had most of their troops there on the border of France. And so if you know, I think it's called the English Channel. There it separates France and Great Britain. And they were kind of backed up with almost no supplies, and they were desperate to try to get home. And so the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was just like, we have got to get any and everybody with a boat to go across the English Channel and get as many troops as you can take. He's like, we're talking fish boats, anything. Even if you can only take 5, 6, 7, 8 people, like, we need you to go and move and save our troops now, or else that could turn the tide of the war. And one of the quotes he said that I loved, it said, "We will fight on the fields, we will fight on the beaches, we will fight in the streets, in the parks, and in our houses. We will never stop fighting." And if it wasn't for this miracle, I mean, Great Britain would have probably easily been defeated, and there would have been Nazis in the palace ruling, at least for a time, there in Great Britain. But because so many people jumped in and made a teeny tiny little impact, that totally did a major turn for the war. And a lot of people wonder, like, why didn't Germany pursue them? They had Great Britain's back against the wall. They really could have, like, finished things off for probably, possibly permanently, but they didn't. And so, like I said, teeny tiny little things can make a huge, huge impact. And so I know being cooped up at this time seems like there's nothing I can do. What the heck? I mean, this is ridiculous. But you never know. You never know what kind of teeny tiny little things you could do for your parents, for your siblings, for your friends, for your grandparents, for your neighbors, people that don't know Jesus, all kinds of things to make a difference. You can send them a little 30-second video or something just to say, hey, we miss you. I mean, that kind of stuff goes a long way right now with what's been going on in the world. So, is there anything I can pray for you guys for? Anything going on that you want me to know about, that I should pray about?